My name is Mark. I'm your performance Sherpa for the day. How many of you have climbed the Mount Everest of technical performance?
Which would that be?
I don't know if I've
Just pick one. In your
in
career, there was that one project you're like, that was really hard. We got to the top. I'm never doing that again. Right? Right. And it keeps coming back, right? Same project, another project comes along. You're like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, so we had 10 dysfunctions on the first project. So we solved 2 of them. Now we got there a little fast. And by the time you've done this, some of you guys like me, you've done it maybe 100 times. You're like the Sherpas on Mount Everest that are like, I just live up here, and I'm not really excited. I mean, me going to the top of Mount Everest is not a big deal. It's like every Thursday. So, but I'm happy to help other people. You've never been. I'll carry your stuff. You know, you can not be in shape and whatever, and we'll go, and everyone will learn. But yeah, so it's one of the various advantages of being an independent consultant is that you can pick whatever title you want. Because you don't, I mean, you don't have a boss or anything. So the other one I have is performacologist. Sort of finding bottlenecks in a system. You're going to reach up in there, and oh, your CPU is pretty good. And memory seems nice and squishy. Nothing abnormal there. We're going to make sure your I/O is working correctly, of course. So the performacologist is the other one. So this presentation, I've been to, I think, nearly a dozen different CMG chapters across the country after giving this presentation last November at Impact. How many of you were at Impact last year? It was good. Were you at my session? No, so this is totally exciting for you, isn't it? Or you're riveted, which is.
I'm all on Twitter.
If you're not on Twitter, that's the thing. CMG News, follow CMG News on Twitter. It's actually, there's some new people that are getting the Twitterness happening. They're twits, basically. But this is it's a fun presentation because we often talk about all these great new exciting things that we do, right? In our industry, it's a new product, it's a new technique, it's a new methodology, it's a new name for the same thing that we've been doing for 25 years. But it's a new name, so it's never been done before. I never quite got that. I went independent in 2012, and I started working in sort of strategic capacities, kind of like a Sherpa, helping lots of customers improve their performance practices for software development, systems management, connecting development and operations. I'm currently an employee of PayPal. I have a clicker too. Can I use my own clicker?
If you want to use your own clicker, it's right here.
I mean, don't take it personally, David.
No, these actually are Schwab clickers.
Are they Schwab clickers?
So it's up to you, dude.
Look at this. Oh, I'm going to try it. No, that did something else. Oh, look at that. We're there. So in the course of, I'm going to back up a little bit here. I'm not sure what's making the noises, but that's exciting. So when I went independent, I started working with lots of customers and bringing whatever I thought. I'm going to be an independent consultant. I'm going to help everyone get over what's dysfunctional about their lives and all this kind of stuff. There's somebody, oh, that's annoying. I'm going to dismiss that. I have unread messages. So
Red arrow.
you're good. I'm going to let David handle that while I tell the story. And so I work with lots of different customers in a capacity between 2 weeks and a month, just meeting with their people, reviewing their processes, tools, the environments, what they were doing, what they were up against, for doing better software development, performance practices within software development. And in the culmination of after about 4 or 5 years, I noticed some of these trends. And so I put together for CMG, submitted this paper, and I was very grateful to have got the Mullen Award. I think Priyanka was also a Mullen Award winner, which is great. And she's marvelous. I met her in St. Louis, I believe. And so I came up with these 5 dysfunctional areas that actually cause what you mentioned, the flash crash, but not necessarily the flash crash, more like night capital, so software development issues that are just destroying ops. And I kept seeing that these were not necessarily just technical problems that a good engineer could solve. I spent 5 years, 6 years at Microsoft with a whole bunch of software people who didn't really understand hardware. And so I was one of those guys who's like, you know, this is how we can get the schedulers to actually work and do this kind of stuff. And this is an anomaly within the architecture for Itanium. Any Itanium users out there? Oh yeah, it's still good. They're coming with more pipelines. It's going to happen. I predict, you know, this Docker containerization of the world. Forget it. All going single monolith Itanium. I'm kidding. That's actually a terrible prediction. So I noticed all these dysfunctions. In that same time frame, as an independent consultant, I also started a podcast. So I started a podcast called PerfBytes with my friend James Pulley. James, who's also presented at CMG here and there throughout the years. So we started a podcast, and there's a segment of the podcast called News of the Damned, which was basically innocent civilians, human beings on the planet, being punished by the IT department. So we were basically, those are the people, like, Satan cannot keep up with the evil doing that we do in IT by pushing out a change.
Your point?
The point being, the point being that Satan actually introduces the segment, but we review crashing websites and try to look at the pathology that went behind what caused them to crash, either front-end performance issues, or in some cases we knew maybe what the architecture was in the back end. So we start showcasing all these different sites. And of course, if you guys remember even a few years around Black Friday, Cyber Monday, obviously some of the big names in e-commerce take a crash. So Best Buy was on there. So we saw big e-commerce websites, and of course then Amazon is on there. Another thing we saw was like the Night Capital crash. So things that are affecting the markets and taking out thousands of people. Pardon?
You say Night Capital.
KNIGHT.
Okay,
yeah, Night Capital. It was, I think, a rogue algorithm. Something from a test segment or something got deployed.
Supposed to buy it and sold instead.
Whether it was supposed to deploy or
containers and continuous deployment, baby.
they were not a DevOps shop, but they definitely pushed some crappy code, or something got marked as good for prod, which should have stayed somewhere in the test region, and it didn't happen. There was another one in the NASDAQ world. There was, I think, a server, a DMZ server, some sort of neutral zone coordination server that nobody, you know, I thought you were going to take care of that. No, I thought you were going to take care of that. And then, of course, the thing runs out of juice, throws a hard drive, and you're done. So there was some really, really bad behaviors. So these are just two examples that we had on the show. And then, of course, there were a few other airlines, Ticketmaster in the UK, there was Kia, presidential debates. Of course, we've been through two presidential debates, the Pope, the Dalai Lama, Target, the Book of Mormon, another presidential debate, another airline, more promotions, Princess Kate and Princess Kate's babies, Prancercise, another airline, Star Trek, Disney, the United Arab Emirates, you name it, every different segment of all these different things, especially musical acts, selling tickets. Almost every segment had some sort of horrible story of crashing a website, right? The biggest one for us happened in 2013, which was our old friends at the ACA, the healthcare.gov, the HSA. So how many of you remember a year's worth? Actually, for a year, whenever we would try to find other, it was just website crash, and you got 4 pages of Google keyword results, which are just ACA, healthcare.gov, healthcare.gov, healthcare.gov. This is probably the biggest dysfunction, and there are a couple, there was a guy at Velocity, I can't think of his name, Mike something off the top of my head. You can see a YouTube video of him talking about being the lead engineer in the crisis for 90 days or 180 days after healthcare.gov crashed, to actually talk about what was really dysfunctional that caused that crash. And you'd be surprised, sure, they manifested as systems problems, but almost all of them were communication problems, human-related problems, process-related problems. And of course, behind all of this, in my desire to leave something behind in my career when I leave the planet someday, is to actually, somebody said, hey, that guy shared a few good ideas on how we can change these dysfunctions. So all at the same time, I came up with these 5 areas to answer why do we keep seeing all these sites crash, and what have we learned, and can we do, at least at this point, a little checkpoint with ourselves on these dysfunctions. And these are the 5 areas. Accountability, details, rewards, sharing, and speed. And those are, well, I'm going to tell you about them, right? Of course, my favorite one, we're performance people, right? So we start with speed. Speed's way fun, right? Let's talk about speed. How fast is fast?
Speed of light.
Dude, it's fast.
Speed of dark.
Yeah, speed of light, you can't argue. I mean, it's a propagation problem, right? You look at someone and say, you have network congestion. No, you don't, you have a propagation problem. Why? Can you go faster than the speed of light? What are you talking about? And they just have no idea that their website transaction is running down a fiber channel somewhere. It is a photon. Like that page that just rendered is a photon. They have no idea that that's happening. It's just kind of crazy. But they expect it to get there like that. Where's the server? Phoenix. Okay, we're in Denver, Phoenix. 25 milliseconds, maybe we could get that pretty close. Coast to coast is about 50 milliseconds for a photon to make it. But now we're talking about, let's open a call center in India. Where are your customers? California. It's 190, 100 plus. It's getting a little bit better with some of the routes that they put in recently. But some of the original trunk lines that came in through Chennai, yeah, we're talking over 200 milliseconds just round trip to get a photon from here to India and back. But that's the business. We're going to go into business. It'll be awesome, right? So speed. So things going faster at the same time. So we know slow is slow, but fast, how fast is fast? Do we really want things to be fast? Is faster always better? So are any of you guitar players in the room? Anyone? Yes? Classical, steel string, electric? Steel string? All right, that's good. There's still, like, if you look at some of these crazy guys that don't have a life and all they do is practice all day long. I went to a couple of bluegrass festivals, like mandolin players, and it's all like so small. I'm like I can't, I never get it. But this is a guy that plays the guitar 320 beats per minute. 320 beats per, imagine like a, okay, that's like a nice 60, 70 beats, that's about 70 beats per minute right there, right? A little bit fast. 60 beats per minute is kind of like your heart rate. If you're kind of an athletic person, you're probably between 60, 70 beats per minute. This guy's at 320 beats per minute, which if you ever listen to it, is not musical, right? It is like, it sounds like construction in the next room, like when they're, remember when we had to wire Ethernet in the building and they had to, well, we're just going to drill through the concrete. And then in the middle of your conference call, you're like, that's what that sounds like. That's the only analogy I can come up with. But this guy, faster is better. And he's competing in the world record. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? So speed has to be tempered. So one of the dysfunctions that I found around speed is that the human beings that were specifying how fast we need to go really didn't understand speed, right? So the first dysfunction is that if we move really fast from a process standpoint, building software, speccing out the software, we don't have time for doing documents anymore. We don't do documentation. We're just gonna write a brief little story and not talk about how fast something should be. Or we're gonna assume that you, my genius engineer, you understand all of that temporal, non-functional, crazy stuff. I don't need to talk about it. I just assume you're the genius. When you write the code, you know how it's going to perform, right? Especially on early versions of Java or .NET when things, of course, ran fast. No, they didn't. They really didn't, right? And scalability at the same time. So speed, what do our customers really need and why do they need it? So one of the biggest dysfunctions is that people started, we need time to market. We need doing 2-week sprints. You guys, how many in an agile shop at all, working in agile, right? It's counterintuitive because before you learn how you should go fast before you learn how you can go fast. And so there's this pressure, and it's your job. So this pressure, dysfunctionally, was we want you to go really fast, but wait a minute, I really wish I had just a little more time to do some better testing, some better experiment with a couple more algorithms here, see if we can tune this, or you know what, I only have time to copy and paste David's stuff from the component. This is, my thing is similar to your thing, so I'm just gonna copy your code and repurpose it, not noticing that it wasn't thread safe, and in a race condition, I now gave him my last name and he has my social security number on the account object. That's not good when that happens. And if you're working at Schwab, that's a compliance violation, by the way. Just want you to know, don't do that. And we're accelerating things with DevOps, all this process automation. So people going really fast forget that websites, as we're like, this is really fast, are maybe not worth it. And so one of the things I do to help them is understand that as they're automating their processes, as the in-software development, from the moment they write a story to the point where it gets tested, deployed, and it's operating in production, and they're being monitored in production, that there's a bunch of decisions that have to be made, and they're starting to automate those decisions so that human beings don't make those decisions. And the minute I talk about them as, you're gonna have a default decision and a default action based on some number. The response time in test was less than the SLA, so let's push it to prod. Okay, and we're moving really fast. We don't see that the test workload has nothing to do with prod. It's a 1/10 of the scale. Of course the SLA is met. Or maybe we don't have network emulation, so we can't see a round trip. But at the same time, I'm talking and coaching with DevOps people. Hey guys, you're gonna be held accountable for a decision that was automated. What do you think of, how do you feel? Oh, wait a minute. Well, I throw my hands in the air, just push it and let it. The only way that people are gonna learn is if it blows up. And learning should not equal losing your job. And that's so thinking about this is like, all right, where I can make a good decision about performance, let me look at those points, right? Where instead of trying to be all things in a gatekeeping world, when is somebody going to decide to push code from dev into functional test? Well, did we run 10 threads? Did we do small things? The default action, if 10 threads runs about the same as it used to run, all right, you're in tolerance. Maybe there's some scientific tolerance. We can say plus or minus 5% on your response time or payload size or throughput, right? And we can start making those little decisions by default. So when something comes through the pipeline that's totally out of tolerance, the pipeline can move fast, but it'll raise its hand and say, wow, whatever we just did yesterday totally screwed everything up. We should not push this. So that was another area of, if you're going to move really fast, do you automate in those decisions to go at speed and then flag things or even stop the machine from pushing if things are out of tolerance? The other thing I find is that, as would be necessary with Agile or some of these lean development techniques, if you're narrowing the scope, meaning I want to do smaller and smaller and smaller releases, so this team's going to make this component, this team's going to make that component, so that I can get these components built faster. You can move faster instead of having a huge team. The problem is, if I don't talk about performance with you as a dependency about performance with your team and performance with your team, performance and security sometimes ends up being that red-headed stepchild that sits in the middle and, like, you know, how come nobody wants to talk to me? You guys are busy on the work streams, functionally building, functionally testing the components, but performance is one of those hard things to do that gets out of your mind. And so narrowing the scope usually means performance gets left out, and I'll talk about that. The other thing I find as a dysfunction is that you guys heard about these T-shaped people? Have you had like HR training or anything? Yeah, T-shaped people. So you have some breadth. You have like 25 years experience. So you've done a lot of things, but you have one area of depth. And usually for performance people, you have a lot of depth around performance. Systems, architecture, horizontal, right? We know components, we may know hardware, we may know coding techniques for performance, right? But we have breadth. There's also like an M-shaped person, which has like, well, I guess 3 areas of depth. And then it gets weird. People are like, there's a P-shaped person, there's a W-shaped person, where they're like, I have generalist skills, but I can't extrapolate them to the real world because I'm an introvert and I just like reading and leave alone. Shove the pizza under the door, the code comes out, we're done. And I heard, I brought this up as a woman introduced the Z-shaped person. The Z-shaped person is, you are not going to ship this code. I live in Philly, so you can, it's like, it was totally awesome. You are not, are you? I have to stand in front of the microphone. Hope you guys can hear me. So the Z-shaped person. Anyway, the dysfunction around speed is that if you get a bunch of developers that are all T-shaped people, they don't necessarily touch their hands together, right? So it can be, it's not necessarily useful because you'll still get a lot of people that look like the same T-shape, but if you're a performance person coming onto an agile team that has performance goals, you might be a W-shaped person or an M-shaped person or a who cares, I don't have a shaped person. I'm kind of a round-shaped person. So the idea is you're augmenting other people who kind of stay in their safety zone as a letter. And I find that to be pretty useful, or not too limiting to be useful, versus saying, I'll stop what I'm doing today as a C programmer and actually go deeper in C performance, or go deeper in Java performance, or in Go, or whatever it is you're programming in, or web performance on the front end, or database query performance in the back end. So don't be dismissive about people who are like, I'm a T-shaped person, this is my strength, and your strength is performance, I don't have to learn that. I think actually every engineer, no matter what letter you are, can learn more about performance, and that usually helps people go faster. So anyway, that's some of the dysfunctions around speed or moving too fast. Sharing, how many of you have kids? A lot of us have kids. Sharing often looks like this. In the back seat of the car on the road trip, right? Like sharing. So it's the two kids fighting over one particular thing. So I'm going to tell your team to build something and your team to build something. And little do you know, sharing is just going to end up fighting. Well, I need these resources, and I need this budget, and I need an extra person to do this. I need a performance person. I need a performance person. I need my own lab. I need my own environment. I'm going to spin it up in the cloud, etc. Right? So there's lots of competition for resources, and I'll get into the technical depth of it. And mostly we end up fighting in silos back and forth between different teams. So that inability to share, comes from a constraint in budget around systems to get your job done. Sharing that I see in a functional world looks a little bit more like this. Like, people are not fighting, they're figuring out how to get together to solve a computing problem. And there's new models for doing this, like mob programming, paired programming. You get together in small groups. You may share information so that somebody's cross-trained. You might do a session of programming or a session of testing and then move back to your original group. But the idea of sharing and collaborating is almost forced on us. I remember working at Microsoft, everyone had their own office. It really was pizza under the door programming. And so some of these new models for Scrum, some of these new models for Agile require high extroversion, high collaboration. So having managed times to get your sharing, when we have to share stuff, but underneath all of this collaborative time, when I want to be left alone to focus on code, where does performance end up in my thinking if I am always panicked? I don't want to talk about this other group that I have to share resources with, especially when it comes to virtualization. So virtualization, my number one thing about sharing. How many of you are, all your dev and QA is run in a virtual environment? Who made that decision to go virtual? VMware. The VMware sales guy came in and said, look at all these computers sitting around, and they have this excess capacity that it's not green. Oh, we'll get you on the social welfare responsibility thing. Oh my God, I'm not a good global citizen. My computers need to be green, right? So we can look at all the money I can save you. And did they call up the development team? Did they call up necessarily? They'll go in the ops world. How many of you are a VMware admin? No, anyone? No, good, thank God. I can make fun of you. Okay, you are? Okay, I'm gonna totally make fun. I'm just kidding. You're joking, right? Okay. But it's a great ROI model if you are in a very homogeneous workload running in production. It's just that VMware did such a great job of getting things put in production on these virtualized workloads. They said, we got to go make some more money. Well, there's a lot of PCs sitting on everyone's desk. Let's consolidate those. Hey, there's a lot of servers in dev and QA. Let's consolidate. Those guys don't need performance. Let's just consolidate those guys. They don't need CPUs. Let's have no resource governance. So in the middle of you trying to run a load test, you're screwing up the functional test because there's no CPU left over. Over provisioning is a nightmare, right? Obviously, it's going to color the efficacy of your measurements, are completely thrown off. And that, I find, is one of the biggest dysfunctions You can tell these groups you need to collaborate. We're going to have mobbing sessions, all this stuff. In the middle of the mobbing session, they decide we're going to start rapidly putting in some code and getting things to build continuously on demand with continuous integration. And in the middle of those builds, I'm running a load test on the same server. We're sharing other third-party components, and the code is, and we're pushing data through there. I've even had terrible sharing stuff that's complete collisions in test data. Somebody trying to do performance testing on the same database as functional testing had no idea that it was like in the middle of the test. Well, how come my functional test takes so long to respond? Because now it has, sometimes it has 4,000 entries in the list, sometimes it has 400,000 entries in the list and never returns. So there, and believe me, these two teams don't talk to each other. It's really, really crazy. So what you save in consolidation costs, that VMware sales guy did really well. He or she, they took a commission check. Woohoo, look at the money we saved. And then you track back the inability to measure performance prior to production and see that as a root cause because your engineers didn't have data to react to and go, oh, oops, we shouldn't write the query that way. One little query, that's like capital. One little query. And boom, goes to production, costs them millions of dollars in production. Same old thing, cost of a bug, right? If I can catch it soon, it's cheap. Push it to production, it's expensive. Same theory applies. But we somehow were undermined, I think, as performance testers, the word tester maybe, QA maybe, we're undermined in our credibility or respect because we said, look, I'm taking measurements. Now, one of the compensations here that I always find out is that I end up knowing that this is a shared environment. So can I at least do some time sharing? I'll agree to work from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. because that's the only time I can get on the systems and no one else is doing anything. And so that's great work-life balance, you know, because then they expect you to be in meetings all day and then work all night. And it's like right back to the good old days of, well, the only time you can get on the system and get time to do that kind of a test is in the middle of the night. So there you go. And people don't last very long. That's the gray hair. Actually, it's not gray anymore, so that's why. I'm on a DevOps team. I have to like fit in with new, hip, young people. It's kind of nice. So isolating your tests, being able to share time and say every Thursday afternoon from noon until 6, once a week on each sprint, we do some kind of a performance test. Get it into the cadence of the regular use, so you can have a repeatable schedule for doing these tests. And then the real win is getting a developer or a tester or a technical PM or an architect or a systems guy, a systems person to tune in, say, all right, we have a regular cadence for doing these isolated tests. Let's start breaking down those barriers and getting communication happening again after misinforming each other accidentally due to virtualized shared infrastructure. The other thing that I find is how many of you have information, we call them information radiators. Like you put graphing and screens up all over your company. It's like, oh, we can see how many. I see it's like these are the successful build events, and it's just a counter. Days since the last failed build, you know, days since the last death, work accident. It's the same thing you see in like on the lumber yard. It's like, you know, days since the last accident, days since the last, you know, terrible build push something. And they're usually quantitative. They're not trends. And in the performance world, we really like trends. Some of the things Priyanka showed, right? Some of those great dashboards. You can see health going into non-health. And to me, that's, even for a non-performance person, they can get that. And they can see, well, what caused that line in the sand? Oh, here's an annotation, you pushed a code update. We made somebody else kicked off a job and it sucked all the CPU away. We can look at these different things. So trending information makes any of those shared components. We're sharing an entity in the database. We're sharing a system, underlying system, a virtual machine host, a zone, any of that kind of stuff. Hey, we have a shared environment, so I can see in the middle of the day that host went to 100% CPU, and it wasn't caused by my test. It was caused by Bill's test. Let's go yell at Bill. Bill, what did you do in the middle of the day? I don't know. I just checked in some code. Learning opportunity, let's figure out what Bill did and fix it before it gets out of control, right? So making these things visible in a shared way helps people see that. Otherwise, they'll just see what they normally see. Here's my IDE, here's my code, I check it in, I see the Jenkins pipeline, green, 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 except for they don't see they made everyone else go red at the same time. So having that shared visualization seems to help a lot. If you're going to be sharing, figure out how to time share. And of course, if you can, sadly, come out of a terrible event, you can sell against the ROI. I want my own environment, right? As over provisioning will be the kill of it, right? Details. The devil is in the details, right? Those pesky little things that we forgot to mention. So I find, I made a casual mention to Agile. We don't have time to document. We're moving so fast we don't have time to document anything. What's interesting in the conversations I have with people is, do you have time to think? And they'll often say, I don't even have time. If I had time to think, I'd have time to write. Like, okay, so if you had time to think, then you could think enough about the story you're building, the code you're writing, the system you're designing, to actually make decisions. You're making a lot of decisions without a lot of what I would say very concentrated thought. So I haven't done the full study on it, but there's a popular thing, you know, like Daniel Pink, Freakonomics, there's kind of these social psychologists, pop psychologists that kind of go into this stuff. There's like this borrowed thought, right? In the world of copy and paste code, there's also, I can borrow a semantic for thinking from something else and apply it. And that I can do that faster if I'm building new code, right? So sure, I can copy and paste code, but I'm actually borrowing the thinking of another engineer as written in their code, and I can see just enough of the code in a Stack Overflow to go, yeah, that's kind of the same problem. Let's see if it works. The problem is it goes from let's see if it works to I can't really tell whether it works or not, but it sort of seems like it works. So it could be a false negative, right? Or it doesn't seem to be working, but since I didn't really write this code myself, I'm gonna like do some chewing gum and some duct tape around it. So you have this intersection of knowledge and intersection where the knowledge may be borrowed, but the ignorance is that you're not quite 100% capable of applying what you just borrowed. So details. And the biggest thing to point out is in a user story. So the thing that actually resolves this dysfunction for a good number of the people I talk to is to invade the performance user story with performance criteria. So how many of you have user stories? Okay, how many of you have performance criteria in your user story? Or acceptance criteria on the back of the card? See, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. The overwhelming majority of people do not. Even if they had old requirements documents, a lot of times the requirements documents did not have estimations on number of cycles, I/O throughput, and the biggest things that I go to people writing user stories is usually there is a technical product owner, but sometimes it's not even a technical product owner. It's just a product owner that said, take what you want us to build and write a user story. So here's so that I can report to my management as a campaign manager, I want to see the results of an active campaign on a single web page. Great. Oh, that feature is going to be wonderful. We're going to make millions, right? Until you are sitting with the developer in sprint planning and saying, well, really what I should write here is all this information. So that a page loads in less than 2 seconds with 6 to 8 asynchronous data queries simultaneously fired at the same time, approximately 10,000 other users are logged on to the actively using the same application for different campaigns. Then the developer goes, oh, wait, oh, whoa. The complexity and estimation on this story just went off the charts. We need more people. We need to borrow the 2 performance people we know, get them on the team, block the next whatever, you know, this. So this is really an estimation problem where we have removed the details about performance. And really, I didn't put much detail. I put a few things in there about response time requirement. Like, here's our target. We'd love to have 2-second response time. That'd be great. Because we know we're going to spend maybe a few seconds doing round trips to the endpoint, so we'll call it 2 seconds. 6 to 8 asynchronous queries, 10,000 users, so a little bit about workload and volume. We didn't go into talking about architecture. Well, you need to write this in X, Y, and Z language that uses these CPUs, and this architecture is better in the scalability of the transfer to the thing, right? There's almost no technical information required. So I go to product owners and I say, hey, can you guys tell me how long it took you to brush your teeth this morning? 2 minutes. Why? Because the beep on my automated toothpaste, 2 minutes, right? Every dentist will say. 2 minutes. I do it like 2 minutes and 30 seconds because sometimes there's this one. I have a bicuspid that's not. Anyway, it's gonna be expensive. I know. Anyway, the idea is normal human beings can think about time. How long it took to commute, how long it took to brush your teeth, how long it took to be on a phone call. So we can relate as normal human beings. It's not some special esoteric performance craft. So a lot of people just excuse themselves. Thank you for coming, by the way. I don't know where he's got a phone call. Right? So normal people can think about time. Everyone has to think about time, even if you're not a performance thing. So that's the first thing. People are like, oh, I'm not responsible for putting those details because I'm not qualified to talk about time. Wait a minute. You are. 2-second response time on a web page. Any one product owner, even if they're non-technical, they came right out of an MBA program somewhere. Hey, how long, what if this website sits and spins forever? Is that a good thing? No. All right, what do you want it to be? 6 seconds, fine, 6 seconds. At least they can start thinking about it, going, you know what? This area of the application should be really fast. These other areas, they can be slow. No one really, they got time when they use it. Our new mobile app, they'll start talking about the market and how fast someone's gonna use it. Great, time. And volume, they know their target market size. How many people do you want to address with this? So time and volume are the two things I get in the story, and then everything else downstream makes sense. Suddenly these developers that were just copying and pasting go, oh, wait a minute, this is really hard. I'm gonna concentrate. I'm gonna take more time because we're moving really fast. I'm gonna give a proper estimation. We might have to move a little slower because now I see how hard it is. And for guys like me and some of you, 25 years ago, we knew it was hard. We took the time. We went slower. So that's where this relates to speed, and speed relates to sharing, and sharing relates to details. So without the details, you can't effectively move fast in a shared environment. You kind of get where I'm going here. Details. So not knowing can lead you to a negative alternative behavior and decisions. So faster than before. So we're moving really fast, which means if I don't know that you want this at 2 seconds response time with 10,000 users, I'm going to make some code decisions that are antithetical to my objective. You need to know what you need to succeed, also in data and meaning here are my measurements, response time, volume, data size, number of users, etc. And also, what does that mean to a product owner? Like if we can't have 10,000 users simultaneously doing this, we can only get to 2,000, how does that affect your business plan? Okay, fine. So maybe over the course of 5 days, we do a campaign, we get 10,000 people. We're not there at day one, X, Y, and Z. They're going to make business commitments. What does it mean that we can't perform before we're in production? That would be nice. Also, be more specific. One of the things that's complaining is, why are you spending so much time writing these super long, detailed things? Why, and people have said, don't write that in my user story. So I write it on the back of the card and I put it back on the Kanban, right? And then, at Kanban sticky notes, eventually sticky notes, they fall off, right? I mean, go back to the guys at 3M. We need longer duration of the sticky, but that's because people keep moving them around. So after the third time it falls, well, what happens when it falls down? And then they pick it up and they look at the back and they go, oh crap, we're 3 sprints into this. What is this? Those are the performance requirements. Oh crap, stop everything. And they go back and they have to rewrite it. So for a performance person in an agile team or writing user stories, working Kanban or sprint, the thoughts are there, but be sure to write down just enough so that you can scare a developer into thinking that this is going to be hard. And they go back and go, wait a minute, this is probably going to be hard. This is harder than I thought it was going to be. The other thing about performance is that if you start building code and measuring that code, if in development, if you need to scale to 10,000 users, maybe in development it's a 1% environment or something. If it can't even scale to like 10 threads, at least a developer needs to know, we know we're targeting 10,000 in production. I can't even get 10 threads to run. We have some simple apartment model issue, or maybe we're on too small of hardware. I'm developing on my laptop. But even nowadays, a developer beefy laptop can run 10 threads doing something, right? Hopefully. So the idea is that you want a developer to get just enough information to know that they screwed it up. And if it goes to QA, functional testing, where they say, we don't do performance, we'll start putting performance in there so that even they can say, you know what, our performance suite, it usually takes 6 hours to run all of our tests overnight. We came in this morning, it's still going. Why is it taking so long? It's something, oh, but you want to give them enough information to say, what did you guys do? You screwed this up. And then you get to the performance testing team, eventually you're like, all right, now you can start doing some serious performance work if you're doing load testing lab work, because all that other little detail is there. We're just validating you actually did get to 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 users, and we can give information to the ops team on what the threshold should be. So confirm with each recipient along your automated pipeline that they have enough detail to go to the next step. Ready for the next one? It's exciting, isn't it? Speed. Oh, this is exciting stuff. Speed, sharing, details, accountability. Right? How many of you are accountable for performance? If anything happens, I'm responsible. I'm accountable, but I'm not responsible, right? And that ends up looking like this, right? We're gonna hold you accountable. That guy did it. Shame, blame, right? And actually, I wanna do just enough work to make sure that performance is not on my plate, because it's big and scary and we can't measure anything in a shared environment. We're moving too fast. We don't have the details in our stories. So the one thing I'm going to do is try to get that special team, you, the performance guy, we're going to make them accountable. And of course, if they don't exist, they got fired years ago, it rolls right downhill into the ops team. It's like, and what weapons as an op team, what do we show up with? Hardware. In the cloud, of course, we can throw hardware faster than ever before. It's just, we can automatically throw hardware at a problem. And the costs are the same. They're maybe not as high and they took as long, but now the blame and shame game is like, we're trying to avoid being accountable for performance, because it's usually that thing like, no, let's get Mikey. What was it, Life? Wasn't the cereal? Mikey likes, let's get Mikey. Mikey will eat anything. Speaking of really bad code, Mikey will eat your bad code. And if you're running bad code in Lambda now, a serverless app, just open up your pocketbook. Just woo, there we go. That's a terrible algorithm, and just suck all the juice right out of your wallet. It's wonderful. Accountability can look more like this. An interesting story as a team, as we see all these teams, in Agile, we're a team. We're a durable team is this new thing I'm hearing about, where they're sort of like small entrepreneurial units within the company. But small paired mops, small teams, extreme programming. We're going on almost 20 years of XP, right? So the idea that we're forcing people to operate more as a team, and the team is more accountable. I work with a DevOps team, which basically says, look, if I find something wrong, I can go to 6 other people. If I'm empowered to log in and fix it, and I know how to fix it, I'm just gonna fix it. And this is where modern WebOps came from, because WebOps was not super compiled code that took hours and hours to compile. It was like, this is just a flat file I can go in and tweak. So if I'm in operations, my primary job is keeping the plate spinning, but I notice one of the plates has a chip in it and I have the piece right here. I can just go up and glue the thing and we're good. And suddenly all these developers get nervous because WebOps guys were like, I'm fixing your code. Fine, you can set us whatever. And then I got sophisticated. I started automating my fixes because you guys always screw this same code up. So I just scan it, change it, and then push my version. And then they're like, but then they're at war between dev and ops, because the ops team is saying, well, we're maintaining our code, not your code. So you guys take the first shot at developing it. You fired all the testers, so now you give us your crap, and then we rewrite it the way it should be written. And then the WebOps team moves upstream and becomes the DevOps team, and then that becomes the dev team. So it's just interesting evolution over 15 years of what accountability looks like. And if you're an ops person who has full permission to just rewrite and keep the business going, that's a really powerful, empowered position to be in. So the culture is very different. The dysfunction is, I don't empower people. It's the shame and blame accountability model. So I saw in a lot of these companies that were still trying to move fast. They were trying to adapt to Agile. They were trying they've already undermined all the sharing pieces are gone. They've removed some details in what they do, and they still had this accountability model instead of this one, right? So like, how we keep doing it the old way, but we're doing it the new way, and they're sort of halfway into it. So accountability and I'm on a DevOps team. How many of you would call yourselves on a DevOps team or have that in your company? It's really small companies do it, lean startup companies do it, but I work at PayPal. We're an enormous company that is adopting DevOps really quickly. Nordstrom's another one recently that I've talked to. DevOps practices overcome those obstacles through a collaboration, people, automation, information. So we're going to take information, we're going to automate it, and we're going to make sure that people can collaborate based on that information faster than they did before. What I see is anti-collaborators. Somebody who, for the practices of good, are saying, I need to stop this release. And they're getting shot and escorted from the building, right? They get shown the door because everyone else is responding to automated, fast-moving information where there's a lot of shared details in the team that are not written down, but we kind of talked about it. Remember this morning we talked about 2 seconds, but we didn't write 2 seconds down? You're just supposed to know through osmosis or through the astral plane that somehow ops should be having a threshold of 2 seconds. And that's where the dysfunction I saw happening is that if you try to act as an anti-collaborator, there's an attitude, changing the definition and the attitude of accountability. If you're accountable, wow, I see things, I'm not going to try to stop what's happening. I'm actually going to volunteer to be accountable, where in your model, I'm accountable for performance, which means I don't just complain that we have shitty performance. I'm actually going to start going to people and saying, hey, I found a few things. You need to put this on your sprint plan. I'm going to help you. If you don't know how to code for this performance, I know somebody who can help you. You change this attitude from an anti-collaborator where you sort of over-collaborate, which is kind of passive-aggressive, I think. You sort of over-collaborate as a senior, usually performance people are senior people in the architecture pool, in the engineering pool. So use your power as a senior type engineer and over-collaborate to people who are getting performance wrong. And that's where I find these companies, they're like, right, we've been sort of giving incentives the wrong way. We've been incenting gatekeepers, which we used to do in phase gate and waterfall deployment, but we're telling people they need to operate in a non-gatekeeping role. So there's an accountability difference there. So you should naturally see people raising their hand. I would love to be accountable for database performance because it's exciting. We're doing changes to how we do data, where the storage is going to be. We're distributing caching. This is really exciting. I would love to be accountable for it, but I don't write the code. So I'm going to help the people that write the code write it better so that we can be performing better. So that's the accountability model change. And the last one, when is the last time you got a bonus for doing great performance work? Anyone? Right?
Dude, I feel
Once? How long ago? 30 years
a fire hydrant at a dog convention.
Yeah.
It just never ends.
It never ends. If everything runs great in production, the business says, good, that's what we expected of you, right? Yeah, it's like, well, I guess everything's running great. So what are your goals for the new year? Keeping it running great? Well, we don't need a senior guy like you to do that. We could just get some kid to watch the graphs. Yeah, naivete. So anyway, the idea of rewards, when somebody comes up with a great idea for how to run their business, rewards can look like this at the beginning. Hey, you know, we're going to do this great website. It's going to be awesome. Look at all the money we're going to make. We're going to do a campaign. We're going to sell tennis shoes on the internet with a Twitter account. And the minute I go tweet, get this shoe with a URL, 10,000 people show up on the website, crash, spike load. It's like flash crash, but worse because they did it to themselves. They actually pointed the gun like that. So rewards look like this. In the end of that movie, actually, this is good. We're at Schwab talking about sort of fun. This should be the compliance training that you have every year. Be like, don't be like this guy. So this is what happens usually in performance sites that crash dysfunctionally. When somebody said, hey, we're going to make all this money, and they find out in the end you didn't actually follow through on any real actual work to make a site that would scale. Ticketmaster, there's people that have been perp walked in the healthcare.gov. There are people who are brought up on criminal charges for negligence, legal contractual negligence, nothing, you know, really terrible. So rewards. Your site crashes. How many times do you read in the news? Healthcare.gov, this did not happen. But we see it a lot in marketing departments where if the website crashes, we're going to brag. We had so much load on the site. I did such a good job of advertising this event. We crashed the website. Right? That's what's actually happening behind the scenes. But what you see publicly is this showmanship, this bravado of, I am good. We're so awesome. We can crash a website. And it is actually embarrassing when you look behind the scenes when I'm talking to these companies and I'm like, oh, they really, yeah. One guy was totally, we had a huge campaign, totally crashed the website. And I'm there with the business owner, the business rep that actually was giving them product. In this particular company, they had the opportunity to sell through brick and mortar and partners, and they had an opportunity to sell through their own website. And so they had been given, like I think 1,000 units to sell on the website. And of course, the devs and the ops guys are like, we sold all 1,000 units. Whoa, awesome, great. And I'm like, so how many total units are there to the business guy? He didn't look impressed. He's like, yeah, it's great. That's what we expect, total success. That's what we expect. How many total units are there? 75,000. 75,000 units? So he's like, yeah, well, we only give you guys, we only budget for you guys in IT to sell 1,000 because the site only stays up for about 5 minutes. So I'm like, and the other guys are like, yeah, but it's 1,000 units. I'm like, okay, fine, I'm a cheerleader, I'm gonna be positive. A shared accountability model. I can be positive. Great. That's great. Last month you probably only sold 500. Now you get 1,000. We're going the right direction. But they were like, we're done. We succeeded. We don't have to change anything. So I go to the business person. I say, so what if we could stay up for 10 minutes? Would you give us 2,000? He's like, yeah, we give you 2,000 units if you can prove that the site will stay up for 10 minutes. I'm like, okay. What if it stayed up for an hour at the same load, if not maybe more load? Like if we could actually make it perform. He's like, look. The overhead for us selling it on our own website is so small, I would give you all 75,000 units if the site could stay up. And the PMs, the devs, they never even asked. This guy just showed up with such little respect and confidence in his IT team. He's like, you're just a small part of the business. And they were making decisions in offices, in the corner office. Like the dev teams, the IT guys are like, now they were depressed. They were all psyched they made 1,000 units. They're like, oh, wait a minute, we had this huge road to go. Right? So the rewards that you might think you've succeeded are actually more like failure behind the scenes at another level in the company. And I was like, we really need to open our eyes that a good performing, good scaling site, you should be having celebrations happening in the corner office, right? So a system crash is not a measure of success. It's failure, it's just plain failure. Computers are not designed to be failing all the time. That's why we have redundancy, that's why we have all this other stuff, right? And those who continue to fail and they're rewarded as expected, you did your best, it doesn't help, right? So the idea that you need to establish some incentive for quality again, and quality being identified as product health, the longevity of product health. And I see this in DevOps teams where they can push code out pretty quickly. So at some point they're like, we've kind of got stable version of code, and the cadence will move to another part, or they'll start to morph and build in other parts of the structure, kind of like 3D printing. Like you're going to build this part, and then it goes over here and builds another part, and you kind of build the whole system. And stabilization and reward comes after you've run your code in production for 30 days. I'm not going to give you a bonus. I'm not going to give you an incentive. So one hurdle is actually give praise and give rewards to the people if their code succeeded to perform under increased load for 30 days in production. And I had one company that said, we're just going to put they had like a 2,500 or 2,000, like a thank you award, just a normal compensation award that the team can vote on who gets it, or they can give it to the whole team. And they said, for every project, every sprint, there's a $2,500 thumbs up award, whatever it was, and it's specific for performance. So if your component has, if you have performance details in your story and you nail it, and you succeed in production for 30 days, your team gets this reward. Two interesting things happen at that company. One, the attrition from one team, like at the end of a sprint or a couple of sprints, they would go into like a version change, and they would attrition, right? So they would move to other teams. People obviously were like, I'm staying on this team because I know I worked extra hard on complex performance stuff. I'm going to stay on this team another 30 days and not jump around so that they could get the bonus. Well, then in that extra 30 days, they're innovating on what they just did. So the company's like, this is actually, we're giving incentives to people to improve other quality while they're waiting to get their bonus for 30 days. We got them to work on other stuff. We got them to self-volunteer. You know what? We can make this even faster. We could, hey, we found these 2 things in production. And we start learning from production. Now my dev teams are actually connected to ops, not just on the flow. They're like, no, we're actually reviewing prod data and how we can, even in that 30 days, they're like, yeah, now we kind of don't want to go. Like, we'll stay another 30 days. So can you give us it? And now you've got the culture and development was people excited about learning about performance and writing better code. They knew what details were required. They could move faster because they were sort of they worked out their kinks as a team. They sort of were more homogeneous, or they had a longer running relationship so they could go. They got connected to operations so they knew their shared infrastructure. And they were incented and rewarded to be accountable for performance as a team. So the end lesson from all of this, if you do well at accountability, you do well at details, you do well at sharing and speed, and you compensate with a real reward, not just a thank yous are great, but if you put all 5 of those together, you'll find that every engineer and development team, and this particular one, it's a little bit of a unicorn, I guess, but I'm doing it now at PayPal with some of my main workflows, my main streams, and they're like, we like this idea. We can start getting back to what I remember learning in '95, back when they gave out bonuses for good performance. Yeah, that this is what we used to do. The team was larger, long-running team. We knew performance criteria. We had details. We tested. We monitored in production. We improved their code. So that's all I have. Thank you, guys. And I'm happy to take any questions if you want. I'm also going to hang around, obviously, for the happy hour and stuff. So how are we doing on time?
You're 20 minutes.
I went really fast.
No, you had an hour and a half.
But you're a performance guy, you're all about speed.
I had an hour and a half. So, but we started a little bit late. Yeah.
We did. I mean, you took exactly 60 minutes.
Okay. It is a 60-minute presentation. So I can give you back 30 minutes, or does anyone have any crazy questions?
Seems like an awful lot of the problems go back to organizational, and ultimately that's management, and that's real difficult to take on.
The
Because
thing.
half the time they're not going to listen, right?
Well, yeah, and there's also something in. I work on a DevOps team that, just like anyone else, like failed at Agile, and we're set up perfectly to fail at DevOps. And it's just all the human dysfunction that is just, hey, maybe we give some new terminology and that'll change our thinking. But it ultimately is changing thinking. And it boiled down to like these 3 areas. It was this one particular customer where I kind of worked through over, I think it was bar napkin, kind of really good old school bar napkin type of conversation, where he just said, this is a top-down initiative, and other big cultural changes methodology, waterfall to agile, top-down initiative, top-down initiative. He said, most of the things on your list, outside of rewards, the teams are more empowered to use different language. And one of the things I do at some of these companies is I teach very small half-day workshops with different teams, so performance for product owners. So I go into writing performance user stories, and of course, just attitude and language-wise, they're like, I'm just going to start using Mark's language as they started, like, it was a great session, and it's small group exercises, so they learn how to talk to one another. Then they start talking that way in their own teams. So, like on the details one, there's a workshop I have for each of these. The accountability one is a different one. You have to chain with a string. You have to chain things together. So you have dependencies. Like if you're actually going to be accountable, then who else has to be accountable for what for you to succeed? And so I have like a little fun team building workshop for that. But it's performance related. So if this person keeps changing what they do, you have to do another string. And so he's like, all these little workshops are things that just we change at the individual level, but the culture of those individual teams ultimately changes. The rewards was a big one. And then the other policies, you're right, management-wise, the other policy one is around sharing. With the solution I talk about is just put in a schedule. You get to test, then you get to test, then you get to test, just share time slicing. But the other thing was going back to some technical management in the VM administrator who no one ever knew who they were. They were in another country. They had access to shut off anyone's machines whenever they wanted to. In the middle of the day, they'll just move your VM. In the middle of your load test, we'll just move your VMs over here. And you're like, what? And you don't even know who to call. You open a ticket for the thing, and it's buried somewhere in the service management kind of stuff. So, so that was one area where I wanted to give more, and that different customer, but I wanted to give more empowerment to an individual team. You can build your own environment, and at least a small test environment. So they would get some permission to build those environments and actually control that kind of stuff. And then you're like, hey, let me show you in VMware where you can do resource governance. And then they start doing it, and they're like, oh, this is great. We have these little machines that do this, and we have like 3 machines with more. They built their own little environments, and then they swap out the resource changes. 6 p.m. comes, we're going to do overnight load testing, and they change out the resources, shut off some VMs, do their load test overnight. And they had the power to do it. And like, I think 2 weeks later in that gig, after I was gone, I get a call from the ops, the internal IT ops guy. Hey, can you talk to our VMware guy? Because they want to learn what you did. Because that team is like doing great. So there are some things where you have to go break down some silos. And then sometimes that means you have to get high buy-in or something like that. Rewards is a big one, of course. Anytime there's money on the table, you have to have management.
Yes, I like your discussion of details and writing down actual numbers because, often it seems that when people come up with functional requirements, non-functional requirements, then, oh, this should have a, quote, industry-leading user interface, unquote, at delivering lightning-fast performance.
Yep.
Okay, could you be any more specific?
Yes, so subjective language doesn't help. Relative subjective language can help. If somebody did the work to say, we actually have some numbers, and you'll hear people say it has to be the same, if not faster. So relative subjectivity, I find, is okay, but not in a vacuum. So that is an interesting thing. The other thing on that story comes from a woman by the name of Mary, who was the developer in the session where she just had the plain user story. And she's like, yeah, one sprint. I'm going to take this from this and this from this and use that. And it included like 3 other shared dependencies, a main campaigns table, the most overloaded, horrible index monolithic table in the database. And she was like, without any of the performance details, she's like, yeah, okay, I can whip that together and have that done in one sprint, and it's probably medium complexity. And I just happened to run into her, and I said, hey, did you hear about this? The campaigns, the multi-campaign user manager page. He keeps wanting me to come over here. Sorry, David. So the multi-user, and she's like, what do you mean multi-user? I'm like, it's that same page, you're going to have multiple people managing multiple campaigns at the same time. No, it isn't. And I'm like, yeah, it is. And you go back, and she's like, well, let's have a formal meeting, sit down, and whatever again. And I'm like, so here's the user story, and actually pieces of that example are from that chain of user stories. And sure enough, the exact example, she's like, hold the horses. This isn't one sprint. It was like 6 months worth of work. It included a re-architecture of this monolithic table that she was assuming she was going to use. So it was like, and we've been putting technical debt, kicking the can down the road on this entity with no idea how they were going to do it. And like, if we're going to change that, that has impacts as dependencies in our shared world on these other guys that are still attached to the monolith. It just goes on and on and on. And so it went from easily 1-2 week sprint to 6 months worth of like 3 different teams just to do that. And she's like, I'm so glad you actually were just casually talking to me in the break room, And I just met these people. I don't spend a long time. PayPal's the only place that I worked at the contract for a really long time. And she's, because we would have built it and I'd have put it in prod and we'd have been out of business. Yeah, exactly. So the details one is good. And I'm happy to, if you ever wanted to do the user stories workshop, I'd share it with you if you want. It's fun, half day. Next thing you know, people they'll go up and you can assign this story to me, and they will go find their PO and say, all right, how many users, how many transactions, how many records in the database? They'll be nervous about it, and like any learning, right? You're going to be nervous about it until you're like, oh, I know these numbers, I know how to do this, and I've already learned like 5 coding tricks that get me like, that thing I did on the last, we're gonna do that same approach with the caching and another loop algorithm, and then we can put it in this other temporary database, because do I really need eventual consistency or do I need immediate consistency? So they can start asking those caching distributed data questions, get away from the monolith. That's how I see a lot of that architectural issue. And I see people saying we're in the fast moving container Docker world, where they can just spin something up and they're like, well, wait, how many do we need to spin up of this? And this algorithm really is parallel. It should be parallel. And so my number says that I have to do 10,000. Okay, my estimation to ops is then how many VMs containers am I going to need? How many processors am I going to need? So yeah, the detail section is really pretty fun. And it flies in the face of in Agile, we move so fast. I don't have time to document anything. Well, how do you build anything? Oh, we just get around the computer in a shared team session, talk about what we're going to build, and then build what we're going to build. Well, what if you're an introvert? I mean, what if you're an introvert? Just leave me alone. Show me give me some details and just leave me alone to go be a genius, which is a beautiful thing, but the industry is leaning towards this more collaborative, extroverted model, which is not good for everyone. I mean, that's difficult. That's a difficult, back to his point, that's a management issue too. Any other questions? We have plenty of time. Good. Thank you guys for